Hey guys, and welcome back to the GE10T1 restoration project. So, at the early television convention, I did pretty good, I think, I hope, in that I got a superior cabinet. I hope, a good brightness contrast control and a good coil to replace the one that's open. And thank you to my friends at the convention who helped me out. You know who you are. Now, curiously, this has damage in the same place, in some of the same places as the other cabinet. Notably, this same exact side has a crack running along the bottom, so we're going to glue that up right now. It's along the bottom, nobody can see it, no big deal. And also, it's blown out at this back corner, exactly the same as the other cabinet. We got to thinking it's because of the way the chassis is mounted. So the chassis is mounted through 4 bolts right through the bottom. And this material isn't all that thick, and there's all kinds of holes and vent holes and whatnot. And the chassis is kind of heavy, so it's probably not the best design. But the really, really, really good thing is that it has all the vents, or all the louvers, or whatever you want to call those, the grill pieces. This whole area was blown out of the other cabinet. Now it does have some cracks along the front. Again, thin material, all these holes cut in it, very heavy metal object inside. It's not surprising, I think, that it has a little bit of damage. So we are going to glue up the damage. Well, aside from me getting some glue on my hand, that went very well, very, very well. So we have this all glued up top and all along the bottom here, super strong, no problem. We'll clean this up with Novus number 2. Don't see any other issues with it whatsoever. Really, really nice cabinet. Some light scratches, but boy, this is really cleaning up beautifully. This is not oxidized, sun faded. It's polishing up beautifully. That is some really nice, rich grain in there. Now the downside to having an intact top is you need to clean it, or at least I'm cleaning it. So Q-tips, Novus. I have no tips. It's just tedious and time consuming to get between all these slots and slats. And we've got the usual little white flecks that I still don't know exactly where they come from, but they're on everything that's old. But they are coming off pretty easily with either some grain alcohol or a little bit of pressure. So we're getting there, almost done. So we'll take a look at the electronics next. Alright, let's see about wrapping up this chassis. So here is what is hopefully a good brightness control, brightness contrast I think it was, and a coil, a peaking coil, or choke. I forget exactly how it's used, but it is back in there somewhere. And then we will install the picture tube with the new DAG coating on it. And even though it's been sitting for months, it's going to work perfectly, right? Right. Okay, we have a little bit of a potential problem. This must be from an earlier model when they used dual 500K for the brightness and contrast. The 800 series. This is a newer 10T1 series where they use 500K for brightness, which is the section we were having problems with, but it uses 2 meg for the contrast. This says 500K. I don't think I saved the old control either. Or actually, where is that over here? Is that it over here? No, I think that's from something else. I might still have it floating around, in which case potentially I could tear them apart and swap out the 2 meg section. But what I think I'll try doing, because the circuit seems similar, is one, it might work well enough with 500K, or I can add some external resistors to this, one on either side, to make the total resistance closer to 2 meg. The challenge will be, and it's not a really major challenge, but will be to tinker with the resistor values to find a sweet spot for the contrast. Now, we're not receiving a weak over-the-air signal. I suspect the owner is going to feed a strong signal in, so we don't actually need the full range of contrast. Probably a pretty narrow range is going to work. So say I could put 1 meg on one side and 500K on the other, or vice versa. Or put 1.5 meg on one side and go directly on the other. And I think we'll be just fine. I don't think we need that full range of motion, so to speak, on it. But for starters, I think I'll just wire it up as is. And I've already loosened up this. It's a little hard to get in there, but if you take all the screws out, this front part loosens up. And I already dismounted these two controls, so I need to replace that guy. What complicates it a little bit is I got to refresh my memory, because what I did is I bypassed the control and used some fixed resistors down in there, so I got it working without the need to use the controls at all. Well, now that I have the control, I want to undo that control bypassing and yeah, and figure out, take those two resistors out and figure out where the connections are supposed to go to the pot. Alright, I installed the replacement control and I just wired in the 500K. I didn't add any extra resistors. So, how do we do? Well, I believe this would be the brightness function, and yep, that sure enough is functioning as brightness. And for contrast, if I go minimum contrast, maximum contrast, and we've got tons of sound. Now I'm feeding in intentionally a rather weak signal, because I want to see what effect that contrast would have. If I put in a much stronger signal, we could just put contrast basically all the way down, and it seems to work alright. But the sound does get louder if I turn the contrast up higher. Let's try a little bit more challenging waveform. Don't worry about the focus. It'll be better with the proper CRT, not this little test guy. So, you know, this is too much contrast. So we'd want to back that off. Back off the brightness a little. Something about there. Just fine tuning a little. Yeah, I think we're in good shape. So, got to replace one coil and then we'll pop in a full-size CRT. Alright, full-size picture tube installed and working well. Finally, let's replace that open peaking coil. Now, you might very well be thinking, well, wait a minute, the set's working and it looks to be working fairly well. How can that be if we have an open coil? Well, let's take a look at how they are used. That is a peaking coil. That is a peaking coil. They have resistors in parallel with them, and often the coil is actually wound around the body of the resistor. So why are they there? What do they do? Well, they are there to improve the high frequency response of the video amplifier. A video amplifier is a pretty darn demanding circuit. To drive the grid of most CRTs and get really good contrast, you need something on the order of 40-50 volts peak to peak. And full video bandwidth is 4.5 megahertz pre-color. So to make an amplifier that can put out 50 volts peak to peak over 0 to 4.5 megahertz is tough to do. And often these sets didn't quite get there. Maybe they're good to 4, 3.8. That's what that multi-burst pattern is for in this pattern generator. We have all these switches at half a megahertz, 1 megahertz, 1.5, 2, 2.5, all the way up to 4.5. is you can turn these on and off and selectively alter the test pattern, and if you can see, so you can see where your definition starts to drop off. That's a simple way to test your video bandwidth. Otherwise, use a sweep generator. I will try to talk a lot more about that in the future, because we got to talking about that on an online forum, and some interesting experiments were done. Anyways, I digress. So, how can this work if the coil goes open? Well, we still have the resistor completing the circuit, and those are high impedance circuits, so like a 6.8K resistor, a signal go right through. If it didn't have a resistor in parallel, or you wanted to bypass it, you can short these peaking coils out, and for the most part, you probably won't notice a difference. But if you were looking at really fine detail or a really finely detailed test pattern, you would. You would. So ideally, you want those coils to be intact. Tough thing to replace, too. Another topic that came up online is, well, if they do go bad and you don't happen to have a parts chassis, how do you replace this? Yeah, you could go on to Mauser or DigiKey or wherever you choose and get a 165 microhenry inductor. But there's inductors and then there's inductors. You'll see a bewildering array of inductors to choose from. And notice how this is wound. It's two pancake coils with an air gap in between. How you wind the wire has an effect on the characteristics of it. We don't know what the characteristics of this are. We know what the inductance is. That's it. One of the factors would be Q, DC current, but there are other factors too. And anybody who's working in antique radio knows, or how to rewind a coil, how you wind a coil can make a difference. That parasitic capacitance, things like that. So that's why ideally you can get an original one. Good thing is it's pretty infrequent that they do go bad. But in case you're wondering what is a peaking coil, what are they for? That's what they're for, to improve the frequency response of the video amp. And yes, the set can work without them. If you're just going to casually watch it, demonstrate the set, you can get by without them. Alrighty, there is the replacement peaking coil installed. This one in particular is going between the plate of the first video amp stage and the grid of the second video amp stage. So it is very much directly in the signal path. Let's see if it made any difference. Alright, so let's switch to the multi-burst pattern. And yeah, actually, so I don't have a before picture, but I can tell you I do not have as much definition on here. So this is your lowest frequency. So as I turn these off and on, this is your 0.5 megahertz bandwidth, 1 megahertz bandwidth, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 4. Sorry, color burst, 3.58. There's 4 and 4.5. And we actually do have some definition on that far edge. Now, this being a pre-color set, they would have at least tried to get it out to 4.5. We've actually tweaked the channel slug on this one a little bit because I have the fine tuning all the way to the right, where I'm getting my best reception and sound. I'd like to get that more in the center of the fine tuning range. Should be more like right there. There is a little slug. All the TVs have this. Or I shouldn't say most early TVs have some type of slug that you can tweak for each channel. So yeah, nice. So let's flip back to some live programming and do a little look-see at that too. Looking good. There's storms coming through today and reception is just miserable, but for the moment it's looking pretty good. And this must be color programming, because if I zoom in close, we can see chroma dots. And that is the color info leaking through. The downside of really good bandwidth is that if you do color programming, you get weird old dot patterns if you look close. However, there's a way around that. We're going to talk about that in an upcoming series and how to feed a signal into these vintage shuts. But for now, I'm going to do the final adjustments on the linearity and just get the picture centered better and put this thing together. Sets, maybe my least favorite set to work on, but I got to admit, they do perform well.
Shall I find out who's responsible for all this?
I'm working on putting the front together, which is sort of a goofy arrangement. We got the Bakelite, the safety glass, rubber gasket, which is held in place with metal clips around the perimeter with L or angle bracket on the top and bottom. Well, when I got this and I took it apart, I noticed that it was kind of loose. One of the brackets and a couple of the spring steel push-in clips were missing. Well, the owner says lucky because I'm probably one of the few people, maybe the only person on the planet that has a spare front that I picked up more than a decade ago and hung on to. The rest of the cabinet was damaged. I didn't save it. I just kept this because it was nice, and I thought, well, it'd be nice for decoration hanging on the wall or something. But I am willing to pry up a couple of these and use the bracket, transfer it over. This is the earlier rounded rectangular shape versus the double D, but I do believe the dimensions on this stuff are identical. Once I get that in place, ready to pop it back on. The chassis has been installed in the replacement cabinet, and I put some new rubber feet on it. And I realized that it's definitely worth taking your time when this is out on the bench to make all your adjustments, because once it's in the cabinet, you can't get at anything. You can't tweak the ion trap magnet or the yoke or the focus magnet for centering or anything. So you got to get it right before you put this back together. So I got my test pattern going. I hope I got it right. Otherwise, yeah, if you take the front off, you can't get in there. In the back, you can't get at. So you got to take the whole thing apart to make any adjustments. What a pain. Man, so glad to finally get this one done. This is definitely one of the more challenging of the sets to get going. And like I said, not much fun to work on, but they do produce an outstanding picture. This is one of the best of the recent batch I've been doing. Now, I do want to point out one issue with these. So that's not really an issue, it's just a consequence of how they're made. These are two separate pieces of Bakelite, and they screw into the chassis independently. So it's pretty common that these don't line up perfectly, especially because we swapped a different cabinet from the back. But I've seen this in every one of these I've worked on. They don't line up that well, and I've heard that from other collectors too. Not a big deal, not a big deal. Just if any of you are working on one of these and you're getting frustrated, that's the way it goes. You get two screws in the front here that screw into the chassis, two screws down below that screw into the chassis, and then four screws on the main body that screw into the chassis. These do not connect together in any way. There's just a couple little nubs that stick out of this, and that's it. So just go with it. I am really, really happy both to get this done and off the workbench, but also really happy with the quality of the image, and I know this set is really important to the owner, so I'm glad it turned out so well. So that is going to be it for now, or it for this project, I should say. Hope you enjoyed this restoration project on a GE 10T1 Bakelite set, also known as the locomotive. Thanks for watching.
So that carnitine? Yes. Tincture of carnitine is found in certain limited preparations.